Ruthless thugs harass a homeless man, not knowing he's a secret billionaire. It was just past lunchtime, and the line outside the soup kitchen was long. People stood quietly, hands tucked in their coats, waiting for a warm meal. Then came the shouting. "Move, old man!" one of the thugs barked. 3 of them, young, loud, and full of themselves, shoved their way through the crowd. One of them kicked over a bag filled with someone's clothes. That someone was an older man sitting by the wall, beard messy, clothes worn out, eyes tired but calm. "What's this? Your house?" one thug laughed, knocking over the man's cup of loose change. Coins rolled onto the sidewalk. The older man didn't fight back. He just looked up and said softly, "It's all right. Let them pass." People nearby looked away. No one said anything. But what no one knew was that this so-called homeless man had once stood at the top of a skyscraper. That he used to run board meetings, make billion-dollar decisions, and fly in private jets. He used to be Elliot Morgan, one of the richest men in the city. Now, everyone knew him as John. After the thugs walked away, he quietly picked up his scattered change. His hands shook a little from the cold, but he didn't rush. Someone handed him a bottle of water. Another person gave him back a small blanket. "Thanks," he said with a nod, grateful but quiet. He didn't tell them who he really was. He hadn't told anyone, not since the day he left everything behind. That was 3 months ago. Back then, Elliot's life was everything people dream of. A fancy apartment high above the city, drivers, assistants, VIP treatment everywhere. But none of it mattered when his little brother Danny died. Danny had struggled. He called Elliot often, asking for help. But Elliot was always too busy. There was always a meeting, a deal, a dinner. He sent money, sure. Told himself it was enough, until Danny's body was found under a bridge, cold and alone. That night, Elliot sat in his luxury apartment, looking out over the city, and realized he hadn't just lost his brother, he had ignored him, let him slip away. And so he made a decision. He disappeared. No headlines, no announcements. He gave his team an excuse and vanished from the world of suits and glass offices. He changed his clothes, grew out his beard, and walked into the streets of the very city he used to overlook. It was harder than he expected. The first night, he slept under a staircase. It rained. His blanket soaked through. A man stole his shoes while he slept. The second night, someone tried to scare him off from their spot. By the third night, he met an older man named Frank, who showed him where it was safe to sleep, how to fold cardboard so it didn't hurt your back, and which soup kitchens gave decent meals. "You don't talk like the rest of us," Frank said once, "but you learn fast." Elliot, or John, as he now called himself, kept quiet. He was there to listen and watching, because something else was going on in that neighborhood. Shops were getting broken into. People were being forced to pay protection money just to stay open. And every time someone refused, something accidentally happened. Broken windows, fires, police showing up for no reason. The thugs outside the soup kitchen? They were part of something bigger. They weren't just bullies. They were working for someone. And Elliot wanted to know who. He started writing things down. What time the gang showed up. Which shopkeepers paid. Which ones got hurt. No one suspected him. To them, he was just another face in the crowd. Just another man down on his luck, shuffling in line for food, sleeping in alleys, trying to stay warm. But each day, Elliot got closer. Closer to the truth. Closer to the people, and closer to understanding just how far someone like his brother had to fall before anyone noticed. One evening, as he helped stack chairs at the soup kitchen, Maria, the woman who ran the place, looked at him and smiled. "You don't talk much," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. "But you see a lot," Elliot nodded, trying to understand. She smiled again, kind and tired. That's more than most ever try to do. Outside, the same group of thugs walked by, laughing, yelling, scaring away a young boy with a backpack. Elliot watched them, not with fear, but with focus, because he had a plan. He hadn't come here to hide. He'd come here to change things, and nothing, not the cold, not the danger, not even the past, was going to stop him now. The wind that night was sharp. It cut through layers of clothes like they were paper. Elliot sat under a broken fire escape, his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. A thin blanket covered his legs, but it didn't help much. He watched cars go by. Warm people, in warm coats behind warm windows. No one looked at him. That used to be him. The man in the backseat of a black car, checking emails, rushing to the next big thing. Now, he was invisible. "You're in my spot," a voice said. Elliot looked up quickly. A tall man stood over him, face half in shadow. "I didn't know," Elliot said, already moving. The man waved him off. "I'm messing with you," he said, grinning. "But be careful. Some folks out here, they don't joke." Elliot nodded. "Got it." The man sat down beside him with a grunt. "I'm called Joe," he said. "Most folks out here know me. You?" "John," Elliot replied, the name still new in his mouth. Joe nodded, pulling out a crushed sandwich from his coat pocket. "Cold out here tonight. Real cold. You got layers?" "Not enough," Elliot admitted. Joe handed him half the sandwich without a word. That moment, simple as it was, meant something. On the streets, you learned quickly. Real kindness didn't come with cameras or speeches. It came with a half-eaten sandwich and a name. In the following days, Elliot began to understand the rhythm of the street, the morning shuffle to find bathrooms before the shops locked their doors, the rush to the soup kitchen before food ran out, the quiet spots that were safe to sleep in, and the ones that weren't. Frank, the old man from earlier, became his guide. "This corner's okay," Frank explained one morning. "The bakery owner doesn't call the cops. That alley? Stay out. Some boys there think they run the place." Elliot listened. He followed, and he wrote. Each night, under dim streetlights, he pulled out his little notebook and wrote what he saw. Who came and went. Which shops looked scared. Who the gang talked to. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was purpose. One afternoon, he stood in line at a small convenience store when he saw it. 3 men, big, loud, angry, stormed into the shop. "Rent's due," one of them growled. The shop owner, a small man in his 50s, looked panicked. "I paid last week. That was for last month," another snapped. "New week, new price." Elliot stepped back quietly, ducking near the gum rack, pretending to look at magazines. He watched as the men pulled out a clipboard. Real professional. They wrote something down, took a wad of cash from the register, and left. No one said a word. Not the other shoppers. Not the cashier. Elliot followed the men at a distance. They went 3 blocks down, stopped at a bar, and handed off the clipboard to a man in a leather coat who didn't even look up from his drink. Back at the soup kitchen, Elliot found Frank eating soup. "They hit the shop again," Elliot said. Frank didn't look surprised. "Same every week. They call it protection money. Funny, right? Protection from who? Themselves." "Why doesn't anyone report them?" Elliot asked. Frank laughed, a dry, sad laugh. "To who? The cops? You think they care? You think they don't already know?" Elliot felt a chill deeper than the cold outside. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat against the side of an old church, watching the stars fight to shine through. The city lights. How many people had his brother tried to tell? How many times had Danny called him, not just for money, but to be heard? And how many times did Elliot brush it off with a transfer and a promise to talk soon? The pain in his chest wasn't from the cold this time. It was from regret. The next day, he made a decision. He started talking to people. Quietly, carefully. He asked about the gang, about the man in the leather coat, about the clipboard. Most were too scared to answer, but some whispered names. They call him Vic. That bar on 9th Street? It's a front. Watch your back. They don't like questions. Elliot kept writing. One evening, he found a young boy crying behind the soup kitchen. "What's wrong?" Elliot asked gently. The boy looked up. Dirt on his cheeks, jacket torn. "They took my bag," he said. "It had all my stuff." Elliot sat beside him. "What's your name?" "Tom." "Well, Tom," Elliot said, "we'll find something to keep you warm tonight." He gave the boy his blanket. He'd figure something out for himself later, because that's what his brother would have done. What he should have done. He was starting to understand now. This life wasn't just about missing things, showers, food, sleep. It was about missing people, missing dignity, missing chances. But Elliot had found his, and he wouldn't waste it. Not again. It started with footsteps, soft, distant, but steady. Elliot sat on the stone steps outside a closed library. It was late. Most people in his position would have found a place to curl up by now. But Elliot had been thinking. Too much to sleep. The eye. Steps stopped just behind him. "You ask a lot of questions." The voice was sharp, not loud, controlled. Elliot turned slowly. A tall man stood there, clean jacket, hard stare. "I don't know what you mean," Elliot said calmly. The man crouched, down just enough to meet his eyes. "I think you do." Then he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. "Just stay quiet, stay out of the way. You'll live longer." And just like that, he was gone. Elliot sat there for a while, heart beating harder than it should have. He had known this would happen eventually. The more questions he asked, the more he noticed. Sooner or later, someone was going to notice him too. But what surprised him wasn't fear. It was clarity. He was getting close. Too close. The next morning, Elliot helped Maria unload canned goods from a van behind the soup kitchen. She looked tired more than usual. "They came by again," she said, voice low. "Said if I didn't cooperate, I might find the place locked up for health violations next week." Elliot paused. "You tell anyone?" "Tell who?" Maria gave him a look. "The police. Half of them probably eat at the same table as those guys." He wanted to say something. Offer some hope. But hope doesn't come easy when you're constantly watching over your shoulder. Instead, he nodded. "Let me take care of the backroom inventory today." Maria smiled faintly. "Thank you, John. I don't know what I'd do without you these days." That hit harder than she probably meant it to. Later that afternoon, Elliot made his way to the bar he'd been watching for weeks. Same place the thugs always returned to. Same man always sitting at the corner table, flipping through papers and counting money. Today, Elliot walked in. He kept his head low, moved like he belonged there. He took a seat near the back, close enough to listen, far enough to blend in, and they were talking. 3 more shops last week. 2 paid, 1 got broken into. Told him next time it won't be the window. What about the old lady at the soup place? She's stubborn, but she'll crack. The man in the corner didn't look up. He just said one thing. No mistakes. Not this close to expansion. Elliot quietly pulled out a pen and scratched notes inside a small paperback book. He wasn't just listening anymore. He was building a case. Names, schedules, threats. He wasn't a cop, wasn't a reporter. He was someone with nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. Outside, the city buzzed as usual. People walked past him like he didn't exist, and that's what gave him power. No one notices the invisible man. No, one expects the homeless guy with a torn coat and a beanie pulled low to understand how front businesses work, how dirty money flows, or how real power moves behind closed doors. But Elliot did. He used to sit on the other side of those doors. He knew how to follow the scent of corruption, even if it wore a different face now. That night, he returned to his alley behind the bakery and found something that made his blood run cold. His blanket was slashed. His notebook was missing. Spray painted on the brick wall above where he usually slept were 3 words: "Know your place." He didn't panic, but he didn't rest either. Frank showed up an hour later and froze when he saw the writing. "They're watching you," he said. "I know." "You need to back off," Frank warned. "This ain't your fight." "Yes," Elliot said quietly. "It is?" Frank sighed. "At least change where you sleep for a few days. I've got a corner near the train yard. No one checks there." Elliot hesitated. "Thanks." "Don't thank me," Frank muttered. "Just don't get yourself killed." But it wasn't fear that kept Elliot up that night. It was something else. For the first time, he was seeing how deep the roots went. This wasn't just about some petty gang asking for money. It was a system. Shops forced to pay, officers looking away, charities like Maria's being crushed quietly, people disappearing, and no one asking questions. That's what haunted Elliot. Most. The silence. His brother had died in silence. So many others lived in it every day, and that's what these men counted on. That no one would ask questions, that no one would dig deeper. Elliot knew what he had to do. He had to be the one who didn't look away. The next morning, he borrowed an old phone from another shelter regular and used it to check public records at the library. It wasn't much, but he was trained to follow trails, and it didn't take long to find something. One of the businesses being threatened had changed owners twice in the last year, both times bought by shell companies. Another shop that refused to pay had burned. Down 3 months ago. No suspect ever arrested, and the soup kitchen's building? The land had been rezoned recently, marked for redevelopment. This wasn't random. It was planned. Block by block, they were clearing out the poor, replacing them with empty luxury, pushing out the heart of the neighborhood to make room for something shinier. Elliot looked up from the screen. He wasn't going to let that happen. Not again. Not this time. He slid the phone into his coat pocket and walked back into the cold, but his steps were steady. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He had a mission. He had names. And now, they had a problem. It was just after sundown, and the city lights were flickering on, one by one. Elliot sat in the corner of the library's old public computer section. His hoodie was pulled low, hands cold, fingers tapping fast on the dusty keyboard. He wasn't looking up news or emails, not like he used to. Now it was property records, license renewals, donation lists. One of the gang's key enforcers, the quiet one with the scar above his brow, had been seen entering a foundation, office on 17th Street, a foundation that claimed to help inner-city youth, but received a strangely high number of anonymous donations. The kind of place that looked good on paper, but smelled like a front. Elliot dug deeper. Tax records, building permits, buried names. All of it led back to one person, the man they called Vic. He had no last name in the neighborhood, but his influence stretched far beyond these blocks. Then Elliot froze. A shadow moved in the reflection of the computer screen behind him. He turned, casually, and locked eyes with someone who shouldn't be there. It was a man in a black overcoat. Clean cut, mid-40s, square jaw, strong posture. Elliot's breath caught. James, he hadn't seen him in nearly a year. James had once been the head of Elliot's personal security team, a former military man. Sharp as a blade. Loyal. Maybe too loyal. And now, He was standing in the same public library Elliot had been using for weeks. James scanned the room, eyes like searchlights. He didn't recognize Elliot at first. Why would he? The man in front of him had a scruffy beard, sunken eyes, worn jeans, and dirty shoes, a far cry from the tailored suits and luxury watches of the Elliot he used to guard. Still, Elliot didn't wait to find out if the connection would click. He quietly logged off, grabbed a stack of free newspapers, and slipped out the back exit, like he'd done 100 times before. He walked for blocks, fast, then slow, ducking into alleys, turning down empty side streets, watching every reflection, every shadow. He knew the city better than most, but right now, it felt like the walls were closing in. Back at the soup kitchen, Maria noticed right away. "You look like you saw a ghost," she said gently, handing him a bowl of stew. "Something like that," Elliot said, forcing a smile. Maria gave him a long look. "You okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I think someone from my past is looking for me." "Family? No. The kind that used to protect me, and might ruin everything if they find me now." Maria didn't ask more. She just nodded and went back to serving food. That's what Elliot loved most about her. She never pushed. She just gave space, something not many people in this world offered. That night, Elliot returned to the train yard where Frank had shown him a safe place to sleep. It was behind an old freight car covered in graffiti, quiet and hidden. He found Frank already there, setting up a small campfire in a tin can. "Rough day?" Frank asked without looking up. "Worse," Elliot replied. "Someone from my old life might have seen me." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You want to talk about who you really are?" Elliot hesitated. He hadn't told anyone. Not fully. But Frank wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. "Back then," Elliot said slowly, "I had everything. Money, status, people who answered when I called." Frank gave a dry laugh. "I figured. You've got that used to be important. Look, I ignored my brother," Elliot continued. "He was struggling. I thought sending money was enough. He died out here. Alone." Frank's face softened. "I'm sorry." Elliot nodded. "So now I'm trying to fix what I should have seen, what I should have helped him with." Frank stared into the fire. "You know," he said after a while, "I had a son, haven't seen him in years, got tired of my drinking. My disappearing. Now I disappear for real." The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Sometimes pain recognizes pain. A few nights later, Elliot walked by the corner where he first met that boy, Tom. He wasn't there. Instead, there was a broken shoelace and a torn backpack strap in the gutter. Elliot asked around. No one had seen him in days. He went to the soup kitchen. Nothing. He checked the old bus station where kids sometimes hid out. Nothing. Something felt off. That evening, he returned to the bar, the gang's hangout spot. He waited, outside, hidden behind a half-burned billboard, until he saw one of the enforcers leave through the back. He followed him quietly, weaving through alleyways, steps light, breath steady. The man stopped in front of a building Elliot hadn't noticed before. A warehouse, no signs, blacked-out windows, steel door, then a soft sound, a muffled cry. Elliot's pulse picked up. Was Tom inside? He stepped back, heart pounding, brain racing. He wasn't ready yet. He needed proof. He needed help. He needed to be smart, because now it wasn't just about his brother. It was about the kids still alive, the neighbors still holding on. The Marias, the Franks, the Toms. If he made one wrong move, they'd all pay the price. That night, Elliot opened his notebook again. But this time, he didn't just write down what he saw. He wrote who he was, for the first time, in full. He wrote, "My name is Elliot Morgan. I am not a homeless man. I chose this life to understand my brother's pain, to walk his streets, to see what he saw. And now, I'm in deep. They're watching me. They're threatening people. And a boy might be missing. But I won't run. He closed the notebook and held it to his chest. Then he whispered to the night, I couldn't save Danny, but maybe I can save someone else. The days that followed felt heavier. Not colder, just heavier. The kind of days where every step feels like walking through water. Elliot had been on the streets long enough now that the dirt didn't bother him, the cold didn't surprise him, and the hunger didn't scare him. What got to him was silence. The silence about missing kids. The silence around scared shopkeepers. The silence of people too tired to fight, but Elliot was done being silent. He started spending more time at the public library, hours at a time, carefully digging into public records and connecting dots the way he used to in boardrooms, hunting down business leaks. Only now, the stakes were different. One name kept coming up, Hope United Foundation, a registered nonprofit. It claimed to offer addiction recovery, job training, youth outreach. It also shared addresses with businesses where thugs had been spotted. It received big anonymous donations, always in cash, and its directors changed every few months. But buried inside one of the quarterly filings, Elliot found something. A signature, sloppy, rushed, but familiar. It matched one he had seen on those so-called protection forms the gang used. This wasn't just a street gang, it was a business, and at the top of that business was Victor. That night, Elliot sat with Frank near a busted radiator behind the old pharmacy. Frank passed him a cup of weak coffee. You ever think about leaving? Elliot asked. Frank gave a tired laugh. Every day. But it ain't just the streets that keep people here. It's what the streets take from you, the stuff you lose on the inside. Elliot nodded. I think I'm starting to understand that. Frank glanced sideways. You've been digging too deep. They know. I know they know. Frank took a slow sip. Then you better be sure this is worth it. Elliot looked down at his notebook. On the last page, he had written 4 names, 4 missing kids. Tom's name was at the top. It is, Elliot said quietly. It has to be. The next morning, Elliot made a call on the old burner phone he had hidden behind the lining of his coat. Just one ring, no voice, a code he and a certain friend had agreed on months ago. The next day, a new volunteer showed up at the soup kitchen. Wearing gloves, glasses, and a beat-up backpack, they blended in easily. To everyone else, she was just another kind soul serving soup. But to Elliot, she was someone who used to draft billion-dollar contracts in silence. Her name wasn't important, but her skills were. Together, they started building something Elliot couldn't do alone. A trail. A legal one. Quiet, steady, with photos, financial records, testimonies, logs, times, names. Every whisper was a thread. Every stolen dollar a knot in the rope they were building. And then, something happened. A bakery that had been paying Victor for protection refused. They said no. It was the first real no Elliot had seen since he came to the streets. The next morning, the bakery's windows were smashed, and someone had set fire to the back door. But what Victor didn't know, someone had filmed it. Elliot had asked Maria to install a camera on the roof of the soup kitchen after hours. Just in case, he'd said. That footage now showed a clear view of 2 of Victor's men setting fire to the bakery's back entrance. Elliot watched it on a library computer, eyes stinging with something more than tiredness. We have them, he whispered. That night, he met with his friend, the lawyer, in the back pew of an empty church. She had brought a flash drive wrapped in a sandwich wrapper. Not bad for 2 weeks' work, she said softly. If you keep this up, you won't just dent their operation, you'll crush it. Elliot leaned back in the pew, exhausted. Let's just make it count. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. "And this was delivered to your old office." Inside was a printed photo, blurry, taken from a street camera. Tom, standing near that warehouse, and next to him, Victor. Elliot stared at it for a long time. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No," he whispered, "but I know what I need to do." Later that night, Elliot returned to the train yard. Frank wasn't there. That was odd. He checked the spot behind the freight car. Empty. He checked behind the pharmacy. Nothing, and then he saw it, a torn piece of cloth, from Frank's coat, and smeared on it, barely dried. Blood. The next day felt like a movie played in reverse. Elliot retraced every step, asked everyone he could trust. No one had seen Frank. He asked Maria. Nothing. He checked the shelters, the hospitals, the alleyways. Gone, and he knew. Victor wasn't guessing anymore. Victor knew who he was, and he had taken someone Elliot cared about, not to rob him, to send a message. That night, Elliot sat outside the soup kitchen. The lights were off. The kitchen was closed. Even the streets felt quiet. He pulled out his notebook. Every page was full now. Proof. Stories. Timelines. Names. He closed the cover, stared up at the stars barely visible beyond the city lights. "I'm not running," he said softly. "You hear me, Victor? I'm not running. Not now. Not ever." Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the burner phone, and made a call. When a voice on the other end said, "We're ready when you are," Elliot replied, "It's time." The day started like any other. But by sundown, the neighborhood would never be the same. It began with a whisper, then a message, then a line forming outside Maria's soup kitchen. Not for food, but for something else. A protest. A gathering. A reckoning. Elliot stood on the sidewalk, hoodie up, notebook in hand. His eyes scanned the crowd. They came in ones and twos at first, quietly, carefully. Some holding signs made from cardboard boxes. Others bringing their kids, their voices, their stories. Shop owners, homeless neighbors, mothers, teens. People who had once looked away now stood shoulder to shoulder. The sign at the front said it all. "We are not invisible anymore." Maria stood near the door, a microphone in hand, borrowed from the church down the street. Her voice cracked, but her words were clear. For years, we were told to stay quiet, to be grateful for scraps, to pay for safety that was never safe. But not anymore. Applause followed. Some clapped slowly. Some cried. Elliot stood nearby, still anonymous. He wasn't ready yet. Not until it mattered. Not until the world was watching. And that moment was coming. At 12:07 p.m., the first news van arrived, then another, then two more. The protest had been quietly organized, mostly through burner phones, whispers in food lines, flyers tucked inside donation bags, and now the press had picked it up. A story was unfolding in the heart of the city, an entire block, unified, standing against something darker than just street crime. A full takedown of a system, and Victor knew it. At 12:39 p.m., Victor arrived. 3 black SUVs rolled down the street like sharks in calm water. He stepped out in a crisp coat, flanked by his men, calm, smiling, pretending to be someone he wasn't. Someone powerful, respectable. "Afternoon, neighbors," he said, voice dripping fake charm. "I see you've decided to host a little event. Mind if I join?" Maria didn't flinch. "This isn't for you." "Oh, but it is," Victor replied, scanning the crowd. "You're protesting my so-called crimes, aren't you? Well, let's hear them. What proof do you have?" Elliot's fingers tightened around the notebook. "Not yet." Victor turned toward the cameras. "This soup kitchen is here because I allowed it. I could have had this land condemned a year ago. I didn't." "Why?" "Because I care." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Victor smiled. You think I'm the villain? He said. You think I'm the reason this city is falling apart? No. The reason is people who make promises and walk away. Rich men who vanish when it gets hard. The ones who cause the problem, not the ones trying to fix it. Elliot felt that like a slap. Victor wasn't just attacking the protest. He was baiting him. You want a villain? Victor said louder. Find the man who stirred this up and disappeared. Where is he? Silence. The cameras scanned the crowd. Maria looked at Elliot. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Elliot stepped forward, one step. Then another. The crowd parted. He walked toward Victor slowly, calmly. Victor's eyes narrowed, then widened. He recognized him. Elliot pulled down his hood, straightened his shoulders, and for the first time in months, stood tall. My name is Elliot. Morgan, he said, voice steady. I used to be invisible to this city. Now I want it to see me. Gasps. Camera shutters. Microphones rushed forward. Victor's smirk vanished. I lived on these streets for 4 months. I gave up everything to understand what I ignored for years. I watched people get hurt. I saw good people forced into silence. I saw kids disappear. I saw a system that worked better for men like you than for the ones just trying to survive. Victor laughed, shaky now. You expect people to believe this stunt? Elliot pulled out the notebook. This isn't a stunt. It's a record. Names, dates, payments, threats, footage. He nodded to the van parked across the street. His lawyer stepped out and handed USB drives to every journalist there. Elliot turned back to Victor. I know about the fake foundation, the bribed councilmen, the businesses you laundered through. I know about the missing kids. I know everything. Victor's voice dropped to a whisper. You think this makes you a hero? You think money will save you now? No, Elliot replied. But people will. Then he raised his voice to the crowd. How many of you paid Victor for protection? Hands went up. How many of you lost your shop, your home, your family because of him? More hands. Then today, Elliot said, we end it. Victor lunged. Too late. Undercover officers were already moving. They tackled him, his men, his driver. Handcuffs clicked in every direction. Victor Rodriguez, one officer said, loud enough for the cameras. You are under arrest for extortion, money laundering, conspiracy, trafficking, and obstruction of justice. Victor thrashed. This isn't over. No, Elliot whispered. It's just beginning. That night, the soup kitchen stayed open late. Not for food, for celebration. Music played from someone's phone speaker. People danced, hugged, cried. Elliot sat on the front steps. Maria joined him. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Just thinking. About what? That for the first time in my life, Elliot said. I feel like I did something that matters. Maria smiled. You did more than that. You reminded people they matter too. He nodded again, eyes misting. Then he looked up at the stars. The ones barely visible through city smog. He used to think the city looked best from the top of a skyscraper. Now? Now he knew the truth. The best view was from the ground, right next. To the people who never stopped fighting, even when no one was watching. And tomorrow, they'd keep building, together. The morning after Victor's arrest, the neighborhood was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear. The other kind, the kind that comes after a storm. Elliot stood on the sidewalk in front of the soup kitchen, watching as a little girl chalked a rainbow on the cracked pavement. Her mother stood nearby, talking with Maria. The woman smiled for the first time in what seemed like months. The weight that had pressed on this place, the fear that lived in shadows. It was lifting, and Elliot felt something he hadn't in years. Stillness. Not the stillness of silence, the stillness of peace. Over the next few weeks, the change was slow, but real. Victor's empire didn't vanish overnight. But with him gone, with the evidence out, with the press running stories daily, his network collapsed like dominoes. Some people fled, others were arrested. Some turned themselves in. And the rest? They saw what was coming and backed off. No more collection, visits. No more smashed windows. No more threats slipped under doors. The streets were different. People walked taller. Elliot stayed, not because he had to anymore, but because he wanted to. He traded his alley sleeping spot for a small back room, in the soup kitchen, fixed up by a few volunteers using donated paint and old furniture. He didn't shave off the beard yet, didn't put on a suit. That part could wait. There was still work to do. Frank returned a week later, battered, quiet, but alive. He walked into the soup kitchen holding nothing but a torn coat and a plastic bag. Maria cried when she saw him. Elliot didn't say a word. He just stood up and hugged him, tightly. Frank didn't hug back at first, but then he did. No words, just gratitude. Soon, the back room of the soup kitchen became something new, a place for second chances. Frank started meeting with a few of the younger men, the ones who had once been close to Victor's gang, but had nowhere else to go now. They met every Thursday, called it the table, not therapy. Not school, just a safe place to talk, learn, and begin again. You've got to want change, Frank would say, but you don't have to do it alone. Tom was found. He had been moved to another warehouse in another part of the city, the final shipment Victor had arranged before his arrest. Thanks to Elliot's notes and photos, the police found him and 3 other kids. Shaken, but safe. When Elliot saw Tom walk through the soup kitchen doors again, he didn't say anything. Tom didn't either. He just walked up and handed Elliot something small, the broken strap from his old backpack. I kept it, Tom said, in case I ever found you again. Elliot blinked hard, then gave Tom a new backpack. A good one. With books inside. Tom's name was the first written into the new scholarship program Elliot helped fund, one that would send homeless and at-risk youth to college. The program was named after Danny. One day, a reporter asked Elliot, "Why didn't you come back sooner? Why stay on the street so long when you could have ended it earlier?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He looked out at the community garden they were planting behind the soup kitchen. Kids laughing, neighbors working together, Frank teaching someone how to fix a broken bike. Then he said, "Because I wasn't ready to fix something until I understood how badly it was broken. The building where Victor had once run his front organization, it's a youth center now, funded by the Morgan Foundation, not named after Elliot, named after hope. The community voted for it. They said it didn't belong to any one person. It belonged to all of them." Months passed. The beard came off. The suit returned, but not like before. Elliot walked into boardrooms with rolled-up sleeves now. He didn't speak in buzzwords. He spoke in names, in lives, in realities that most of his peers still didn't understand, but listened to now because they had seen what he'd done. He hadn't gone undercover to impress them, but the world had changed anyway. On a quiet evening, Elliot stood alone under the bridge where Danny had died. He placed a single sunflower there. Danny's favorite. "I couldn't save you," he whispered. "But you saved me." His voice cracked. "I carry you now, in everything I do." He sat for a while, not in mourning, but in memory. And when he got up, he smiled softly. Because he knew Danny would have been proud. Back at the soup kitchen, the lights were on. The smell of warm bread filled the air. People were eating, laughing, planning. Maria waved from the doorway. Frank was teaching a boy how to write a resume. Tom was reading to a group of younger kids, and above it all, painted on the wall in bright colors, was a mural. It showed a city, skyline, but not from above, from street level, with hands reaching out, holding each other. At the bottom, it read, "See us now." That was the real ending. Not the arrest, not the reveal, but this. A neighborhood that found its voice, people who stood together, and a man who stopped running because he finally saw what mattered. Not money, not power, but people. Always people. And the hope that rises when just one person decides not to look away.